Lehigh Valley economy. One is needed improvements and expansion to road, bridge, and rail infrastructure. The private sector usually runs ahead of where the public sector can be in catching up to what's going on in the development world. And secondly, what we see oftentimes is the effect of regulations, not just at federal agency regulations, but state and local, on adding time and cost to development projects. Can each of you give us some of your thoughts around an approach around infrastructure, catching up infrastructure to the level of development we're seeing, and also what your thoughts are around regulatory reform in general? And I'll start with Tim.
Sure. When I worked for Stossel at Fox, we used to do segments a lot where we would show the entire Federal Register of regulations, and this was boxes going up to the top of our studio, where you would have to stand on a forklift to get to the top of it, and it was, you know, a sticky thing to do on television, but it actually proved an important point, which is that regulation has definitely gotten to an excessive degree, and that's something that the Trump administration should be commended for beginning to address. When he passed the plan for each new regulation, 2 should have to be eliminated. I think that's very good, and that's very sensible, and there's only so much the executive branch can do, unfortunately. We need to have rational, common sense voices in Congress that can codify some of these things into law as well. But I think that it's one of the backbones that we talked about earlier of a good economy, is to let businesses operate, because businesses create jobs. The government doesn't create jobs, so we need businesses to be able to freely operate and innovate and hire people and grow their businesses. Now, to infrastructure, this is something, I think one of the reasons that the public sector is always behind the curve is, for some reason, the infrastructure conversation is always centered, it seems, in the federal government, talking about Washington passing these giant infrastructure bills, which, you know, first of all, it's something that both sides seem to agree about, that we need to spend more of our money. But what I don't understand about the way this operates is, why do we take money here, send it to Washington, and then have politicians there divvy it up and decide what we get back of our own money to spend on things that we need here? This is part of the structural problem, that we have to start thinking of infrastructure as something to address by states and local governments, where there's less red tape, there's less in the way of getting it done, with a lot of private-public partnerships, because when private companies have a stake in it and are involved, they have more incentive to succeed, I guess, than the public sector.
Thank you, Tim. Marty?
You know, we're lucky right here in the state. You know, we have great representation by our state senators, Pat Brown, Mario Scavello. You know, right now, Pennsylvania is actually spending more money than ever on infrastructure, fixing our roads, our highways, and our bridges. I mean, just take a look around here in the Lehigh Valley with all the construction that's been going on. You know, but the federal government does need to step up and provide more. It's also important to note, infrastructure is just not highways, roads, and bridges. We need to invest in our electrical grids, our rail lines, transportation hubs. We've been seeing a record amount of private investment in infrastructure. This is also a good thing. Data centers, natural gas pipelines, cell towers. Infrastructure investment is happening, and it is needed. And we know when the private sector gets involved with infrastructure investment, it creates high-paying jobs. So the government doesn't have to do it all on their own, but the federal government does need to get more involved in some infrastructure spending. Regulations, you know, that's something different. You know, regulations are important to our region. It's important to America. You know, they play an important role in society when it makes things safer, protects consumers, assures the safety to everybody in the public. You know, but we cannot have regulations that are so burdensome to business owners that they cannot compete. Oftentimes, small businesses are the ones that are most vulnerable with regulations. You know, they have regulations for billion-dollar companies, for small businesses. People have 5 employees. You know, that takes somebody to do all the paperwork. A lot of times, small businesses can't compete with a lot of burdensome regulations. That's something that needs to change as well. So we need to make it much easier for small businesses to compete, small businesses to expand, not place burdensome regulations on them, and have them taking care of their customers rather than doing paperwork with regulations. So infrastructure investment, great. We've seen it right here in the Lehigh Valley. We have great leadership with Senator Pat Brown and Mario Scavello. But we need to roll back regulations. And I do think the administration has done a great job of that.
Susan?
Thank you. We have to make sure that red tape does not inhibit the growth of our employers and our industries. But at the same time, we have to make sure that our workers and our community and our environment are protected. I feel very strongly that what we really need is a bipartisan commission that looks at all of our regulations one by one and decides which ones of them should be repealed, which ones need to be rewritten, and which ones need to be retained as is. There's no question that there is room for removal of some of the red tape, but we absolutely have to make sure that this is done in a cautious and prudent manner. As far as infrastructure goes, I don't think there's anybody that really believes that we don't have an infrastructure problem. All you have to do is consider the flooding that we had a couple of months ago when it rained virtually every single day. People actually couldn't get to work because of closed roads and that kind of thing. Infrastructure is not just about roads and bridges, although it's probably worth noting that the American Society of Civil Engineers gives Pennsylvania a C- on its infrastructure. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. The positive of that is that it does create good paying jobs, and it can absolutely be a stimulus to our economy when we rebuild and reform our infrastructure. I think that we absolutely need to work on being more proactive and not reactive. Installing new drainage systems after the floods happen is not the way to do it. We need to be looking at what the problems are. Down south, we've seen it with hurricanes. We're doing all kinds of rebuilding down south instead of building structures that will withstand hurricanes in those areas. And that's a waste of money. Infrastructure is everything from making sure that our roads and routes are good for exports, making sure we have a reliable energy grid, making sure that we have broadband internet everywhere, making sure that we have good drainage systems as well as roads and bridges. So all of these things will help businesses create good paying jobs. That's important for workers, it's important for employees, but I firmly believe that we still need substantial investment in our infrastructure.
Thank you.